My name is Victoria Hayes, I'm 28 years old, and I'm sitting in Dr. Peterson's cardiology office staring at medical bills that might as well be my death sentence. The numbers blur together as my hands shake, $40,000 for the surgery that could save my life, but all I can hear are my father's words from 3 years ago echoing in my mind like a broken record. "Brielle needs this more than you need to live," he said, choosing to fund my sister's cosmetic surgery instead of my heart repair. Now my phone won't stop buzzing with desperate messages from that same family, begging me to pay for Brielle's cancer treatment after I somehow built a six-figure business despite nearly dying from the condition they refused to help me fix. Before we dive into this story that changed everything I thought I knew about family, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and while you're there, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about overcoming impossible family situations. Trust me, what happened next will show you exactly what happens when the people who abandoned you suddenly need your success to survive. 3 years ago, I was drowning in a life I never asked for, working double shifts at Romano's diner during the day and keeping books for small businesses at night, all while my chest felt like someone was squeezing my heart in a vice every few hours. The fainting spells started small, just quick dizzy moments I could blame on skipping meals or working too hard, but they were getting worse every week. I'd wake up on bathroom floors, in supply closets, once even behind the dumpster at work where I'd gone to throw away trash and simply collapsed. My family knew something was wrong, but in the Hayes household, there was only room for one person's problems at a time, and that person was never me. My sister Brielle, 25 and absolutely stunning, had been planning her career advancement procedures for months. She wanted breast augmentation and rhinoplasty, claiming that her modeling prospects depended on these changes and that once she became successful, she'd be able to support our entire family. Our father Douglas treated her dreams like sacred gospel, while our mother Linda nodded along to every word that came out of the golden child's mouth. The day everything fell apart started like any other. I was carrying a heavy tray of plates at Romano's when the world suddenly tilted sideways. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the floor with paramedics checking my pulse while customers stared and my manager looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The ambulance ride to County General felt like floating in a nightmare, with the EMT asking questions I couldn't answer about my medical history because I'd never been able to afford proper health care. Dr. Martinez in the emergency room was kind but direct. After hours of tests and scans that I knew I couldn't afford, she sat me down with results that made my blood run cold. I had a severe congenital heart defect that had been getting worse for years, probably since childhood, and without immediate surgical intervention, I was looking at heart failure within months. The surgery would cost $40,000, she explained gently, and while they could put me on a payment plan, I needed to have at least half as a down payment to schedule the procedure. When I called my family from the hospital phone, my father's response still burns in my memory like acid. "Victoria, you know we've already committed that money to Brielle's procedures. The plastic surgeon requires payment up front, and we can't back out now." I tried to explain that this was literally life or death, that I could die without this surgery, but he cut me off with the phrase that would haunt me for years. "Brielle's success is going to benefit this whole family. Sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the greater good." My mother got on the phone next, and I actually felt hope for about 30 seconds. "Honey, I'm so sorry this is happening," she said in that gentle voice she used when she wanted to sound caring. "But your father is right about the money situation. Maybe you could look into charity care, or wait until your insurance gets better, or find some other way to manage this." Some other way to manage dying, she meant. Some other way to survive while they spent my life-saving surgery money on my sister's vanity project. Brielle was the worst, though. When she finally came to the phone, her voice was thick with manufactured sympathy. "Oh Victoria, this is so scary. But you have to understand, I've already scheduled everything, and Daddy promised me this money. Besides, once I start making real money as a model, I'll be able to help you with medical stuff all the time. Think of this as an investment in your future too." She actually had the audacity to suggest that her breast implants were somehow going to save my life down the road. The hospital discharged me the next morning with a handful of prescriptions I couldn't afford and strict instructions to avoid physical exertion, which was essentially impossible given that I needed 2 jobs to survive. I took the bus home because I couldn't afford the taxi, and when I walked into our house, the entire family was gathered around Brielle's laptop looking at before and after photos of rhinoplasty procedures. They looked up when I entered like I was interrupting something important, and my father actually seemed annoyed that I was there. "How did it go?" my mother asked, but she was already looking back at the screen where Brielle was scrolling through nose shapes. When I tried to explain the severity of my condition and the timeline for surgery, Douglas waved his hand dismissively. "The doctors always make everything sound dramatic to get money. You're young, you're strong, you'll figure something out." Brielle didn't even look up from her computer screen as she added, "Besides, if it was really that serious, wouldn't insurance cover it?" That night, while I lay in bed listening to my heartbeat skip and stutter in patterns that terrified me, I could hear my family downstairs celebrating Brielle's consultation appointment that was scheduled for the following week. They were laughing and planning and talking about how proud they were going to be when she became a famous model. Nobody came upstairs to check on me. Nobody asked how I was feeling or what I was going to do about my heart. I realized that in my family's eyes, I had already ceased to exist as anything more than an inconvenience. The weeks following my hospital visit were a blur of desperate phone calls and humiliating rejections. Every morning I'd wake up hoping my heart would stay steady long enough to get through another day of applications for medical loans, charity care programs, and payment assistance that I was somehow both too poor and too employed to qualify for. The irony of being caught in the middle, making too much money as a minimum wage worker to qualify for free care but far too little to actually afford medical treatment, was not lost on me. My shifts at Romano's became exercises in terror management. Every time I felt that familiar flutter in my chest, I'd have to excuse myself to splash cold water on my face and practice breathing exercises I'd learned from YouTube videos about managing heart conditions. The other waitresses started whispering about me, wondering if I was on drugs or having mental health issues, because I'd disappear for 10 minutes at a time and come back pale and shaking. Meanwhile, my family's social media presence became a daily torture device. My father posted pictures of him and Brielle at expensive restaurants, celebrating our girl's upcoming transformation, while my mother shared countdown posts about Brielle's surgery date with captions like, "So proud of my daughter for investing in her future." They documented every step of Brielle's pre-procedure shopping trips, her consultation appointments, even her special diet plan to optimize healing, all while I was literally dying in the same house. The loan applications were the worst part. Sitting in sterile bank offices while financial advisors looked at my credit score and income statements like I was asking them to fund a vacation instead of life-saving medical care. "Unfortunately, Ms. Hayes, your debt-to-income ratio doesn't support a loan of this size," they'd say with practiced sympathy. "Perhaps you could ask family members to co-sign?" The question felt like a cruel joke every single time. I tried reaching out to extended family, thinking maybe someone would understand the gravity of the situation and help me convince my parents to reconsider their priorities. My Aunt Susan listened patiently to my explanation before suggesting that maybe I was being a little dramatic about the whole thing and that Brielle had waited so long for this opportunity that it wouldn't be fair to disrupt her plans. My Uncle Dave was more direct, telling me that it wasn't his place to interfere with my parents' financial decisions and that I should respect their choices. The health episodes were getting worse by the week. During one particularly busy Saturday lunch shift, I collapsed while carrying a tray of hot soup, sending ceramic bowls crashing and scalding liquid everywhere. The customers were horrified, my manager was furious about the mess and the potential lawsuit, and the paramedics who arrived asked if this was becoming a regular occurrence. When I admitted it was the 4th time in 6 weeks, they strongly advised me to stop working until I received proper medical treatment, which might as well have been advice to stop breathing. Brielle, meanwhile, was reveling in the attention surrounding her upcoming procedures. She started a social media countdown with daily posts about her transformation journey, complete with professional photo shoots and sponsored content from beauty brands who were apparently eager to document her surgical experience. She gained thousands of followers who praised her for being brave enough to invest in herself and inspiring for pursuing her dreams. The comments section was filled with supporters telling her how lucky she was to have family who believed in her goals. The breaking point came when I overheard a phone conversation between my parents about my situation. My mother was talking to someone, probably another family member, explaining that I was being overly emotional about my health problems and that they couldn't enable my victim mentality by changing their financial commitments every time I had a medical scare. She's always been dramatic about health issues, Linda said, laughing. Remember when she thought she had appendicitis in high school and it was just gas? This is probably the same thing. I realized that night, lying awake with my heart pounding erratically while I listened to Brielle video chatting with friends about her excitement for surgery week, that my family had already written me off. They weren't choosing Brielle's cosmetic procedures over my medical emergency because they didn't understand the severity of my condition. They were choosing her because they simply didn't value my life enough to change their plans. The money wasn't really the issue, their priorities were. The major cardiac episode hit me at my second job on a Tuesday evening in October. I was organizing files for Henderson Accounting when my chest suddenly felt like it was caving in, and the next thing I knew, I was waking up in an intensive care unit with tubes and wires attached to every part of my body. The emergency surgery had been performed using emergency charity funding, the nurse explained, and while it had stabilized my immediate condition, I would need follow-up procedures that weren't covered by the emergency assistance program. What struck me most about waking up wasn't the pain or the confusion, but the complete silence of my phone. No missed calls, no text messages, nothing from my family who I later learned had been contacted by the hospital about my condition. While I was having emergency heart surgery, they were across town at Brielle's preoperative consultation, and according to the timestamps on social media, they had spent the evening celebrating at an upscale restaurant afterward. My roommate in the cardiac recovery unit was a 73-year-old woman named Martha Rodriguez who had just undergone a valve replacement. Martha was sharp, witty, and had no patience for self-pity, especially after she heard me tearfully trying to explain my situation to the hospital's financial counselor over the phone. After I hung up, she fixed me with a look that could have melted steel and asked, "Are you going to spend your recovery feeling sorry for yourself, or are you going to do something about this situation?" Martha's story was both heartbreaking and inspiring. 30 years earlier, her own family had abandoned her when she was diagnosed with breast cancer because they considered her medical bills a burden that would interfere with their lifestyle plans. Instead of wallowing, she had started a small bookkeeping business from her hospital bed, using a borrowed laptop to manage accounts for local businesses who needed help but couldn't afford big accounting firms. By the time she retired, she had built a company that employed 12 people and served over 200 clients. The beautiful thing about betrayal, Martha told me while we watched the sunrise through our hospital window, is that it strips away all your illusions about people and forces you to see who actually matters. Your family just gave you the greatest gift they could possibly give you, though they don't realize it. They showed you exactly who they are, which means you never have to waste another day trying to earn love that was never available in the first place. She convinced me to bring my laptop to the hospital and start reaching out to small businesses in the area who might need bookkeeping services. "You're already doing this work part-time," she pointed out. "The only difference is now you're going to do it for yourself instead of making other people rich." Within 3 days, I had secured my first independent client, a small construction company whose books were in complete chaos and who was willing to pay cash for someone to straighten out their financial records. While I was taking my first steps toward financial independence from a hospital bed, my family was documenting Brielle's surgical experience like it was a red carpet event. The Instagram post showed her in designer hospital gowns, receiving flowers and gifts from family members, and celebrating her transformation journey with professional photography sessions. The contrast between her experience and mine was so stark it would have been funny if it wasn't so devastating. The day before I was scheduled to be discharged, Brielle finally called me. Her voice was muffled from the nasal surgery, but she managed to convey a sense of excitement about her results while expressing what sounded like genuine concern about my condition. I'm so glad you're okay, she said, though she didn't ask for any details about my surgery or recovery. Once I'm healed up and start booking modeling jobs, we'll definitely figure out a way to help you with your medical stuff. The promise felt as substantial as smoke. My parents sent flowers to the hospital with a card that read "Thinking of you during this difficult time," as if my cardiac emergency was some kind of natural disaster that had happened to me rather than a medical condition they had refused to help me address. When I called to thank them for the flowers and update them on my condition, my mother spent most of the conversation telling me about how proud they were of Brielle's courage and how excited they were to see her modeling career take off. Martha was discharged 2 days before me, but not before she made me promise to keep in touch and update her on my business progress. Remember, she said as she gathered her belongings, success is the best revenge, but more importantly, it's the best freedom. Build something that makes you proud to be exactly who you are. She handed me a list of potential clients she had compiled during our conversations, small businesses in the area who needed accounting help but couldn't afford the big firms. That final night in the hospital, lying in the dark listening to the beeping of monitors and thinking about everything that had happened, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of my entire life. I was done trying to earn my place in a family that had already decided I didn't matter. I was done accepting scraps of attention and affection from people who saw my life as less valuable than my sister's appearance. I was going to build something that would make it impossible for anyone to ever dismiss me again. The first 6 months after my surgery were a masterclass in determination fueled by righteous anger. I converted my bedroom into a home office, invested in proper accounting software with money borrowed from Martha, and started reaching out to every small business owner I could find who looked overwhelmed by their financial paperwork. My recovery period actually worked in my favor because potential clients felt comfortable working with someone who was available during unconventional hours and could provide personalized attention that bigger firms couldn't offer. My first major breakthrough came when I helped Rodriguez Construction untangle 3 years of mismanaged books that had left them facing potential tax penalties. Within 2 weeks, I had not only organized their finances but identified several tax deductions they had been missing, saving them over $8,000 in the process. Word spread quickly in the contractor community, and suddenly I had more work than I could handle from people who needed someone trustworthy to manage their business finances. The physical recovery from my surgery was challenging, but following Dr. Martinez's strict regimen of medication, regular cardiology checkups, and carefully monitored exercise actually gave me more energy than I'd had in years. For the first time since high school, I wasn't constantly exhausted or worried about my heart stopping without warning. The clarity that came with proper medical treatment was almost overwhelming after spending so long in a constant state of physical crisis. Meanwhile, my family was discovering that Brielle's modeling career was not the sure thing they had imagined. Despite her new look and growing social media following, actual paid modeling work was sporadic and far less lucrative than they had expected. The few jobs she booked barely covered her ongoing maintenance costs for the procedures, let alone provided the family-supporting income they had envisioned. By month 4, my parents started making casual comments about how expensive it was to support an aspiring model, especially one who needed regular professional photography and wardrobe updates. The first hint that my family's attitude toward me was changing came in the form of seemingly innocent requests for financial advice. My father called one evening asking if I could take a quick look at his retirement account statements because he was concerned about some investment losses. My mother asked if I knew anything about tax deductions for small business owners, since she was considering starting an online boutique. These conversations felt like olive branches until I realized they were actually fishing expeditions to assess my financial situation. Brielle's approach was more direct. She started calling regularly to chat about her modeling experiences, but every conversation eventually turned to compliments about how smart I was with money and how impressed she was that I was building a business. "You always were the practical one in the family," she'd say with what sounded like genuine admiration. "I'm so glad you found something you're good at." The subtext was clear, she was laying groundwork for future requests. By month 8, my business had grown from 3 clients to over 20, and I was earning more money than I ever had working for other people. I hired a part-time assistant to help with data entry and client communication, rented a small office space downtown, and started building relationships with other local business service providers who could refer clients to me. The sense of control over my own destiny was intoxicating after years of feeling powerless. The real test of my family's changing priorities came when I treated myself to a nice car to replace the 15-year-old sedan that had been breaking down constantly. Nothing excessive, just a reliable Honda Accord that I bought with cash, but apparently this purchase sent shockwaves through the Hayes household. Suddenly, everyone was very interested in how my business was doing and whether I might be interested in helping family members who were struggling with various financial challenges. My parents' requests for assistance started small and seemingly reasonable. Could I help them understand some investment paperwork? Did I know any good contractors who might give family discounts for home improvement projects? Would I be interested in doing their taxes since I was now experienced with business finances? Each favor led to slightly larger requests, and I began to see the pattern of dependency they were trying to establish. The breaking point came when Brielle asked me to co-sign a lease for an expensive downtown apartment that would put her closer to modeling opportunities. When I declined, explaining that I was focused on growing my business and couldn't take on additional financial obligations, her response revealed the family's true expectations. "I can't believe you're being so selfish," she said, her voice sharp with indignation. "After everything our family has done for you, and you won't help me when I need it most." Everything our family had done for me, apparently, included refusing to save my life when I needed it most. That conversation clarified something important. My family had not experienced any genuine change of heart about my value as a person. They had simply recalculated my usefulness based on my improved financial situation. The same people who had dismissed my life-threatening medical emergency were now expecting me to prioritize their comfort and convenience. The irony would have been amusing if it wasn't so predictable. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 18 months after my emergency surgery. My mother's voice was shaking as she delivered the news that Brielle had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of cervical cancer that would require immediate and extensive treatment. The oncologist had outlined a treatment plan that included surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation therapy, with total costs that could exceed $200,000 depending on the complexity of her case. The devastating irony was not lost on me. My sister, who had received family support for elective cosmetic procedures, now faced a genuine life-threatening medical emergency that insurance would only partially cover. The same parents who had refused to help fund my heart surgery were now frantically researching second mortgages and loan options to pay for Brielle's cancer treatment. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of justice that was both perfect and terrible. Within hours of receiving her diagnosis, my family launched into crisis management mode that looked completely different from their response to my medical emergency. Douglas immediately started making phone calls to family members asking for financial assistance, while Linda began researching the best oncologists and treatment centers regardless of cost. Brielle was surrounded by support, encouragement, and the absolute certainty that everyone would do whatever it took to ensure her survival. The first approach came from my mother, who called me with a voice full of manufactured warmth and sudden maternal concern. "Victoria, honey, I know we've had our challenges as a family, but I want you to know how proud we are of what you've accomplished with your business. You've really shown us all what determination and hard work can achieve." The compliments felt like being prepared for slaughter with flattery. She continued with what sounded like a carefully rehearsed speech about how families need to support each other during difficult times and how she had always known I would be successful because I was the smart one who could figure out solutions when others couldn't. The conversation lasted nearly an hour, with Linda sharing details about Brielle's condition, treatment options, and financial challenges that she had never bothered to discuss when I was the one facing medical crisis. My father's approach was more direct but equally transparent. He called the next evening to tell me how much he regretted not being more supportive during my health scare and how he had come to realize that he hadn't fully understood the seriousness of my condition at the time. "I've learned a lot about medical emergencies since then," he said with what sounded like genuine remorse. "I should have been there for you the way I'm trying to be here for Brielle now." The apology might have been meaningful if it hadn't been immediately followed by a detailed explanation of Brielle's treatment costs and insurance coverage gaps. Douglas spent 20 minutes outlining various family members' financial contributions and discussing payment plans with medical providers before finally getting to the point. "We're going to need everyone to contribute what they can," he said. "And given how successful your business has become, we were hoping you might be able to help in a significant way." Brielle's personal appeal was the most manipulative of all. She called crying, which was completely understandable given her diagnosis, but her emotional vulnerability was clearly being weaponized to achieve specific results. "Victoria, I'm so scared," she sobbed into the phone. "The doctors are talking about all these horrible treatments, and I keep thinking about how I wasted so much time being superficial when I should have been appreciating what really matters." She talked about how my strength during my own medical crisis had inspired her to be brave, how she had always looked up to me even if she hadn't expressed it properly, and how she hoped we could become closer as sisters while she fought this battle. "I know I haven't always been the best sister," she admitted through tears, "but I love you so much, and I need you now more than I've ever needed anyone." The conversation was heartbreaking and manipulative in equal measure. Brielle's fear and pain were completely genuine, but the timing and framing of her emotional appeals were clearly calculated to maximize my guilt and minimize my ability to make rational decisions about my involvement. She was using her cancer diagnosis as leverage, which was both understandable and completely inappropriate. The extended family pressure campaign began almost immediately. Cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends started reaching out to express their concern for Brielle and their admiration for my business success. Each conversation followed a similar pattern. Expressions of family pride, updates on Brielle's condition, and gentle suggestions that those who were more fortunate had a responsibility to help those who were struggling. My Aunt Susan was particularly persistent, calling multiple times to share stories about other families who had come together during medical crises and how beautiful it was to see relatives supporting each other. "Blood is thicker than water," she reminded me, apparently forgetting that my blood family had been conspicuously absent when my own blood was literally failing to circulate properly through my damaged heart. The community pressure was even more insidious. Longtime family friends who had supported my parents' decision to prioritize Brielle's cosmetic procedures over my cardiac surgery were now approaching me at the grocery store and local businesses to express their hope that I would do the right thing for my sister. These were the same people who had agreed that my medical emergency was probably exaggerated and that Brielle's modeling career was a worthwhile family investment. The final straw came when Douglas issued what amounted to an ultimatum disguised as a family meeting request. He wanted all family members to gather so we could discuss our collective response to Brielle's medical crisis and ensure that everyone was contributing appropriately based on their individual capabilities. The implication was clear. I was expected to attend this meeting and commit to a substantial financial contribution, or face being labeled as the selfish family member who abandoned her sister in a time of need. The family's manipulation campaign escalated into something that resembled psychological warfare more than grief-stricken relatives seeking support. Within a week of Brielle's diagnosis, I started receiving what seemed like coordinated messages from multiple family members, all expressing similar sentiments with slightly different wording, as if they had been crafted by committee to maximize emotional impact while maintaining plausible deniability about their calculated nature. The historical revisionism was the most disturbing aspect of their approach. Suddenly, every family member had a completely different memory of my medical emergency and their response to it. According to the new family narrative, they had been incredibly supportive during my health crisis, but I had been too proud to accept their help. My father claimed he had offered to co-sign loans for my surgery, while my mother insisted she had researched charity care options extensively. Even Brielle got in on the revision, claiming she had postponed her own procedures to help me, which was demonstrably false based on the timestamps of her social media posts. The community manipulation was more sophisticated and far-reaching than I had anticipated. Linda had apparently been making the rounds at church, the grocery store, and various social gatherings to share Brielle's story while subtly painting me as the successful family member who was reluctant to help her dying sister. The narrative positioned me as someone who had become cold and materialistic since building my business, forgetting the family values that had shaped me. These carefully crafted stories began filtering back to me through clients and professional contacts who had heard secondhand accounts of my situation and wanted to offer advice about family obligations. A business owner I barely knew approached me after a Chamber of Commerce meeting to suggest that sometimes successful people needed to remember that family should come before money. Another client casually mentioned that they had heard I was going through some family challenges and hoped I would make the right choice about supporting my sister. The workplace infiltration was the most professional boundary-crossing behavior I could have imagined from my own family. Douglas had somehow obtained a list of my clients and began reaching out to them directly, not to criticize my work or interfere with my business relationships, but to share Brielle's story and express his hope that the business community would understand the importance of family loyalty during difficult times. Several clients mentioned receiving these calls, and while none of them seemed to think less of me professionally, the fact that my father was involving my professional relationships in our family drama was both embarrassing and completely inappropriate. One client, who had become something of a mentor, pulled me aside to ask if everything was okay and whether I needed any kind of support in dealing with what sounded like a complicated family situation. The most disturbing escalation came when I discovered that Brielle's medical team had been contacted by my family members who wanted to discuss my sister's prognosis and treatment options. While they couldn't share private medical information with my parents without Brielle's consent, they could certainly listen while family members expressed their concerns about my sister's support system and financial resources for treatment. Dr. Kim, Brielle's oncologist, actually called me directly after one such conversation to express her concern that my sister might not have adequate family support for her treatment journey. "Your parents seem very worried about Brielle's emotional state," she explained. "They mentioned that she's been struggling with feeling abandoned by family members during this difficult time." The manipulation was so sophisticated that even medical professionals were being enlisted as unwitting participants in the guilt campaign. The legal threats were the most desperate and inappropriate response of all. Douglas had apparently consulted with a family law attorney about his options for compelling family members to contribute to medical expenses, despite the fact that no such legal obligation exists between adult siblings. The attorney had obviously explained this to him, but he used the consultation as an opportunity to make vague threats about exploring all legal avenues to ensure Brielle received adequate support from her family. When I refused to be intimidated by these empty legal threats, the family shifted to attempting to isolate me from my chosen support system. They began reaching out to Martha, my business mentor and closest friend, to share their version of recent events and express their hope that she would help them convince me to do the right thing for Brielle. Martha, who was far too intelligent and experienced to fall for manipulation tactics, listened politely and then called me to share exactly what they had said. "They're pulling out every manipulation technique in the book," Martha observed with the detached interest of someone who had seen similar family dynamics play out many times. "The guilt trips, the historical revisionism, the community pressure, the isolation attempts, they're even trying to use your sister's genuine medical crisis as emotional leverage. This is textbook manipulation by people who see you as a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be respected." The breaking point came when I realized that the stress of constantly defending myself against psychological manipulation was actually affecting my physical health. My blood pressure had increased, my sleep was disrupted by anxiety, and I was starting to experience the kind of chest tightness that reminded me uncomfortably of my pre-surgery symptoms. The irony was devastating. The same family members who had refused to prioritize my physical health were now threatening my mental and emotional health in service of their financial goals. Martha reminded me of something crucial during one of our coffee conversations. "You survived a medical emergency that your family refused to help you address, and you built a successful business despite their lack of support. Why would you suddenly need their approval or acceptance now? The only thing that has changed is that they want something from you, and they're willing to make you miserable to get it." The truth about my family's financial situation came to light almost by accident, through a combination of professional networking and simple observation that revealed the gap between their claimed financial desperation and their actual circumstances. As someone who now managed finances for dozens of small businesses, I had developed a keen eye for identifying discrepancies between stated financial conditions and observable spending patterns, and my family's story simply didn't add up. The first red flag was my parents' continued lifestyle spending despite their claims of financial hardship due to Brielle's medical expenses. While they were asking family members for emergency loans and discussing second mortgages to pay for cancer treatment, they were also posting social media photos from expensive restaurants, weekend trips to wine country, and shopping excursions that seemed inconsistent with a family facing financial crisis. People who are genuinely struggling with medical debt don't typically maintain their entertainment budgets without adjustment. My deeper investigation began when a client mentioned seeing my father at a real estate investment seminar, which seemed like an odd use of time for someone who claimed to be facing potential bankruptcy due to medical bills. A little research revealed that Douglas and Linda had purchased a rental property 6 months earlier, an investment that would have required significant cash down payment and monthly carrying costs that contradicted their claims of financial distress. The breakthrough came when I ran into my parents' financial advisor at a professional networking event. Without sharing any private client information, she made casual conversation about how nice it was to see families who were financially prepared for emergencies and didn't have to panic when unexpected expenses arose. When I mentioned my concern about my parents' ability to handle Brielle's medical costs, she looked genuinely confused and assured me that they had adequate resources to manage the situation without endangering their retirement security. Further investigation revealed that Brielle's insurance coverage was actually much more comprehensive than the family had indicated. As a model with several ongoing contracts, she had purchased high-quality health insurance that covered the majority of her treatment costs. While there were certainly out-of-pocket expenses and deductibles, the financial burden was far less catastrophic than the family had portrayed to relatives and community members. The most damning discovery came when I learned that Brielle had been receiving substantial financial support from multiple sources that the family had failed to mention during their fundraising efforts. Her modeling agency had arranged for financial assistance through industry charity programs, she had received donations through social media fundraising campaigns, and several extended family members had already contributed significant amounts that apparently weren't being counted toward the family's claimed financial shortfall. Martha helped me understand the psychological dynamics at play during one of our regular coffee meetings. "They're not actually asking you to help save your sister's life," she explained with characteristic directness. "They're asking you to subsidize the family's lifestyle so they don't have to make any personal sacrifices to handle a situation they're perfectly capable of managing on their own. They want your money so they can preserve their assets and maintain their standard of living." The insurance fraud attempt was the most serious discovery of all. Through carefully indirect questioning of the hospital's financial counselor, I learned that someone had attempted to add me as a dependent on my parents' insurance policy for the purpose of claiming family financial responsibility for Brielle's medical expenses. The paperwork had been rejected because I was obviously an independent adult with my own income and insurance, but the attempt revealed the lengths to which my family was willing to go to access my financial resources. The smoking gun came in the form of a recorded conversation that Brielle accidentally created when she butt-dialed me during what was clearly a family strategy meeting. For nearly 20 minutes, I listened to my parents and sister discussing their approach to convincing Victoria to contribute and planning responses to potential objections I might raise. The conversation revealed that they had researched my business income, estimated my personal net worth, and calculated exactly how much they thought they could extract from me without causing me to walk away entirely. Most shocking was Brielle's casual admission that she wasn't actually as scared about the financial aspects of her treatment as she had led me to believe. "I mean, the insurance is covering most of it, and we've gotten donations from like 8 different sources already," she said with a laugh. "But Victoria doesn't need to know that. She's doing so well with her business, and it's not like she has kids or a mortgage or anything expensive to spend money on." My father's response was even more revealing. "The key is making her feel like she's the only one who can save Brielle's life." If she thinks we have other options, she won't feel the urgency to contribute significantly. We need her to believe that her sister will die without her financial intervention. They were literally strategizing about how to manipulate me into believing my sister's survival depended on my money when they had multiple resources available to handle the situation independently. The final piece of the puzzle came when I discovered that the family had established a formal GoFundMe campaign for Brielle's medical expenses that had raised over $30,000 from friends, extended family, and social media supporters. This money had never been mentioned during any of our conversations about the family's financial challenges, and none of the donors knew that the family was simultaneously pressuring relatives for additional private contributions. Armed with this information, I finally understood that my family's approach had nothing to do with genuine financial desperation or medical emergency. They were running a sophisticated manipulation campaign designed to extract money from me while preserving their own assets and lifestyle. Brielle's cancer was real and serious, but the family's claimed inability to handle her treatment costs was completely fabricated for the purpose of exploiting my success and their assumption that I would be too guilt-ridden to investigate their claims. I scheduled the family meeting for a Saturday afternoon at my parents' house, the same living room where they had dismissed my medical emergency 3 years earlier while planning Brielle's cosmetic surgery celebration. The irony of the location was not lost on me, and I had spent considerable time preparing for a conversation that would either clear the air completely or end my relationship with my biological family forever. I arrived with a folder containing every piece of evidence I had gathered about their financial situation, Brielle's actual insurance coverage, the GoFundMe donations, and the recorded conversation that had revealed their manipulation strategy. Martha had helped me organize the information in a clear, logical sequence that would be impossible to deny or explain away, and I had practiced presenting the facts without becoming emotional or accusatory. The family was clearly expecting a very different kind of meeting. Brielle was positioned on the couch looking pale and fragile, surrounded by medical paperwork and get-well cards that seemed strategically arranged to maximize the visual impact of her illness. My parents sat on either side of her in what appeared to be a carefully staged tableau of family unity and crisis management. Douglas opened the conversation with what sounded like a prepared speech about family loyalty and the importance of supporting each other during life's most challenging moments. He spoke about the values they had tried to instill in both daughters and expressed his confidence that we could work together to ensure Brielle received the best possible care without regard to financial constraints. Linda nodded along, occasionally adding supportive comments about how proud they were of both their daughters and how much they loved our family unit. Brielle's contribution was perfectly orchestrated emotional manipulation. She talked about how scared she was, how much the family's support meant to her, and how grateful she felt to have a sister who was successful enough to help during this crisis. She even managed to work in an apology for not being more supportive during my medical emergency, explaining that she had been too young and self-absorbed to understand the seriousness of my condition. When they finished their presentations and looked at me expectantly, I opened my folder and began systematically addressing each element of their manipulation campaign. I started with the documented evidence of their actual financial situation, including the rental property purchase, continued luxury spending, and adequate retirement accounts that could easily cover Brielle's medical expenses without causing genuine hardship. The room's atmosphere changed dramatically as I presented bank statements, property records, and insurance documentation that contradicted every claim they had made about their financial desperation. Douglas's confident demeanor cracked first as he realized I had done actual research rather than simply accepting their word about their circumstances. Linda started fidgeting and looking between her husband and daughter as if seeking guidance about how to respond to information they hadn't expected me to possess. Brielle's reaction was the most telling. Instead of surprise or confusion about my revelations regarding their hidden assets, she immediately became defensive and angry, which revealed that she had been fully aware of the family's actual financial situation throughout their manipulation campaign. "How dare you investigate our private financial information," she snapped, her fragile invalid persona evaporating instantly. "What kind of person spies on their own family during a medical crisis?" I continued with the documentation of the various funding sources they had failed to mention, including the comprehensive insurance coverage, the GoFundMe campaign, the modeling industry assistance, and the substantial donations from extended family members. The mathematical reality was clear. They had more than enough resources to handle Brielle's medical expenses without any contribution from me, and they had known this throughout their entire guilt campaign. The recorded conversation was the final blow that eliminated any possibility of denial or deflection. As my family listened to their own voices discussing how to manipulate me into believing Brielle's survival depended on my financial intervention, the room fell into a silence that felt like the death of every lie they had constructed over the past several months. Douglas recovered first, but his response revealed the true nature of his character when his manipulation tactics were exposed. Instead of apologizing or expressing shame about being caught in an elaborate deception, he became furious that I had dared to question their authority and refuse their demands. "You have no right to judge how we handle this family's financial decisions," he shouted, his face red with indignation. "We raised you, we supported you, and now that you're successful, you think you're too good to help your own sister." Linda's reaction was equally revealing. Rather than expressing any concern about how their manipulation might have affected me or acknowledging the inappropriateness of their deception, she focused entirely on defending their right to expect financial support from their successful daughter. "Family is supposed to take care of family," she said with wounded dignity. "I can't believe you would put money ahead of your sister's life, especially after everything we did for you growing up." The most devastating moment came when Brielle dropped all pretense and revealed the depth of her entitlement and resentment. "Fine, you caught us," she said with a sneer that was completely different from the frightened cancer patient persona she had been maintaining. "But the fact remains that you have way more money than you need, and I'm literally fighting for my life. If you weren't so selfish and bitter about some stupid thing that happened years ago, you would help me without making this into some big dramatic investigation." Her reference to my nearly fatal heart condition as some stupid thing that happened years ago crystallized everything I needed to know about my family's values and their genuine feelings about my worth as a person. Even facing exposure for their manipulation and lies, they were incapable of acknowledging the severity of their past neglect or expressing any genuine remorse for their current deception. I stood up to leave, but Douglas made one final attempt at manipulation by threatening to tell everyone in our extended family and community that I had abandoned my dying sister because of greed and selfishness. "Good luck maintaining your business relationships when everyone knows what kind of person you really are," he said with ugly satisfaction. "People don't want to work with someone who won't even help their own family." My response was calm and factual. I informed them that I would be sharing the evidence I had gathered with any family member or community member who asked about my decision, and that I was confident people would understand the difference between refusing to help someone in genuine need and refusing to be exploited by people who were perfectly capable of handling their own responsibilities. As I walked toward the door, Brielle made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation by returning to her victim persona and claiming that my refusal to help would literally cause her death. The dramatic performance might have been effective if I hadn't just spent an hour documenting their multiple resources for handling her medical expenses, but now it just seemed pathetic and manipulative. I left my childhood home that afternoon knowing that I would never return and that my relationship with my biological family was permanently severed. But instead of feeling sad or guilty, I felt a profound sense of relief and freedom that came from finally understanding exactly who these people were and what they thought of me. The weeks following the confrontation were emotionally complex as I processed the reality that my biological family had been willing to fabricate a financial crisis and exploit my sister's genuine medical emergency to extract money from me. The grief was real, but it wasn't grief for the relationships I was losing, it was grief for the family I had always hoped they might become but now knew they never could be. Martha was instrumental in helping me understand that my feelings of sadness and loss were completely normal, even though my decision to cut contact was completely appropriate. "You're not grieving the people they actually are," she explained during one of our coffee conversations. "You're grieving the parents and sister you deserved to have but never did. That's a real loss, and it's okay to feel sad about it while still protecting yourself from their manipulation." My business continued to thrive as I channeled my emotional energy into building something positive and meaningful. The experience with my family had actually strengthened my resolve to create a company culture based on honesty, integrity, and genuine care for both clients and employees. I hired 3 additional staff members and expanded our services to include financial planning and tax preparation, transforming what had started as a survival strategy into a legitimate regional business. The physical and emotional benefits of removing toxic relationships from my life were profound and immediate. My blood pressure returned to normal levels, my sleep improved dramatically, and the anxiety that had been plaguing me for months disappeared completely. It was as if my body had been holding tension I didn't even realize was there, and releasing it allowed me to experience a level of peace and contentment I had never imagined possible. 6 months after the confrontation, I received an update through mutual acquaintances that Brielle had completed her cancer treatment successfully and was in remission. Her recovery had been funded exactly as I had predicted, through the combination of insurance coverage, the GoFundMe donations, modeling industry assistance, and family resources that had always been available. Learning that she was healthy brought me genuine happiness, despite everything that had happened between us. The community response to our family situation was mixed but ultimately supportive of my decision. Most people who learned the full story, including the evidence I had gathered about the family's manipulation campaign, expressed shock at their behavior and support for my choice to establish boundaries. Some family friends remained loyal to my parents, but their opinions mattered far less to me than I had expected. I used my experience to help other clients who were dealing with similar family manipulation around financial issues. Several business owners confided in me about relatives who were attempting to exploit their success, and I was able to share practical strategies for protecting both personal boundaries and business interests while dealing with family pressure. These conversations often led to deeper relationships with clients who appreciated having someone who understood the complexity of family financial dynamics. My romantic life also improved significantly once I stopped carrying the emotional burden of trying to earn love from people who were incapable of providing it. I met David, a veterinarian whose kindness and integrity were immediately apparent, and our relationship developed naturally without the complications of family drama or financial manipulation. He was fascinated by my business success and supportive of my decision to prioritize emotional health over family obligations. The most meaningful development was my decision to formalize my relationship with Martha by asking her to serve as a mentor for other women who were building businesses after major life crises. We started meeting monthly with a small group of female entrepreneurs who had overcome family rejection, medical emergencies, or financial disasters to create successful companies. These gatherings became a source of inspiration and practical advice that benefited everyone involved. A year after cutting contact with my biological family, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since my emergency heart surgery 3 years earlier. The medical crisis that had nearly killed me, and my family's refusal to help, had ultimately led to discovering my own strength, building a successful business, and creating a chosen family of people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. The life lesson that emerged from this experience was profound. True family is defined by love, support, and mutual respect, not by biological relationships or legal obligations. The people who matter most are those who celebrate your successes, support you during crises, and value your well-being above their own convenience. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing you exactly who they are, because that clarity allows you to invest your emotional energy in relationships that will actually nurture and sustain you. If you've made it this far in my story, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with family challenges and chosen family relationships. Have you ever had to set boundaries with relatives who tried to exploit your success? How did you build your support system when biological family wasn't available or appropriate? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and please share this story with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the possibility of thriving after family rejection. Don't forget to hit that like button if this story resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family manipulation and building authentic relationships, and share this video with anyone who needs to hear that their worth isn't determined by their family's opinion of them. Thank you for listening to my story, And remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is refusing to accept less than you deserve, even from the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. Your peace and well-being matter, and you have the right to protect them from anyone who tries to exploit your kindness for their own benefit.